All right, guys. Along to the first Q&A session. Thanks to everybody who's come along, but thanks also to those who put some questions into the survey. So just to get us started, I'm going to introduce you firstly to Greg Reid. Reid is our presenter for this evening, and he's a long-time fishing guide from the south coast of New South Wales. He's a bit of a TV star. He's been on plenty of fishing shows. You might have seen him on iFish and on Bergie's show and various others as well. I'm going to call him a radio shock jock. He does the high tide. We've got fame here with us tonight, guys. Reid is a bit of a tackle hound. He's heavily involved with Pro Lure, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about Pro Lure this evening and some of the products. Hopefully, Reid's got some things to show us.
I've got a cup of tea too.
And he does a bit of speaking from stage as well. So qualified and very competent angler. And Reedy, it's a pleasure to have you here, and thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Greg. That's
live Q&A sessions.
Thank you. That's a bit overwhelming, but that's fantastic.
It's a bit of a difficult thing, that first one, getting it off the ground and making sure everything works all right. So tremendous to have you here.
Thank you. Yeah, really glad to be here. Thank you. So just a equipment check at this end. I've got a little delay here at the moment.
Now, guys, the other thing that we have a slight delay. So if we seem to respond to what's going on.
So if it seems like I'm faking it, it's just because there's a big delay.
We're going to go through tonight.
Okay, what are we going to cover?
Look, guys, this is what we're going to go through this evening, and most of you have probably seen this. So we're going to cover that are available fishing in about anchor to half a metre depths that we're going to be talking about. So look, I'm going to be and I'm mute. So there's delay. Folks, is first of all wishes that are available to you in the shallow water. Then we'll talk about the fishing to tail. So we'll go through rods, reels, lines, leaders, all that kind of stuff, and get a few tips on those. We're going to talk about how to find fish in that shallow water, and we're going to pump Reedy for some tips and techniques. Now, when I say tips and techniques, these are the questions that some of you have submitted already. So we do have some questions to fire at Reedy straight off the bat. But as we go along, guys, just put some questions in that chat box if you've got questions you'd like answered, and we will endeavour to answer all of those questions during the course of the presentation. So first of all, a little bit about you guys. So who we've got here tonight, we've got people from southeast Queensland right down to southern New South Wales. We don't have any South Australians with us this evening. We don't have any Victorians. We don't have any Western Australians. So we're going to focus our attention on that area from southeast Queensland down to southern New South Wales, which is pretty good because that's the part of the world that Reedy knows best as well. So that's all pretty straightforward. So let's start with that species overview. Now, I was kind of hoping this was going to be a bit of a dialogue, Reedy, but because we've got this delay and we're having a bit of trouble with that, it may be a case of me just handing over to you, and perhaps if you could just give us a rundown of species that are available, talking about this little bit of a little bit of a heads up on tackle and how you might find it a year, that kind of thing. So we're going to be talking brim, estuary perch, whiting tailor, and somebody mentioned other species. So somebody who responded to the survey said that they're fishing for something other than those species in the estuary. So if you'd like to put in the chat box what that species is, if you happen to be with us, whoever answered the question other, we might be able to address that as well. So Reedy, I'm going to hand over to you now, and I'm going to unmute you, so bear with me just a moment, and we'll start going through those species.
Yeah, so
Are you
hopefully,
back with us, Reid?
yeah, we're back. Yeah, sending him sneaky texts underneath the camera too. Um, Hopefully, what we're going to be able to give you is a few techniques here to increase your percentages, and this is not about um, wholly and solely targeting sport fish, because a lot of us at the end of the day too like to go out and catch a feed of fish, and at the end of the day, targeting large fish and trophy fish, certainly something that we've all, or you should all aspire to. But at the end of the day as well, these techniques are a very, very clean, efficient, easy way to actually get you out, get you moving, and get a good feed of fish on the table as well, which is really important. So if you want to actually catch more fish, a lot of what we'll cover here now is very much specifically related around that. Most of this sort of kicked off as a result of the last podcast, which was flathead in the shallows, um, and basically, flathead on surface. And I think from a personal perspective, I gave up the guiding and gave the boats away just a little over, well over 12, nearly 18 months ago, and haven't felt the need to go back to a boat, mainly because it feels like work. But reconnecting with the shallows in the last 18 months has been sort of quite profound as well. And this whole thing with flathead on surface has come along. And it's that in particular has been all about the crossfire. And I'm not sure. Let's just see if we can get that in there now. I've just got to get the. I'm not sure if you can see that, but that's got a hell of a lot of battle scars on it. And the crossfire is an Aussie mode lure. There we go. There we go. Now I can see, Greg. Thanks, mate. This one's got battle scars all over it, as you can see. And they're all fair ink and buffs off flathead off the surface. That's the 110 crossfire. You can see there quite clearly it's got its heritage in the obvious bent minnow, but that's about where the similarities stop. This is a compressed foam lure, and this lure will actually dive. And 9 times out of 10, you'll actually get a lot of bites on the dive as opposed to the surface. It's Big Brother, and the one I prefer to use is the 195, and they've even got it in a 220. And I can tell you, when you get a fish in about that 80 centimetre plus buff, one of these in less than a metre of water, it's a buff just like a barramundi, so it's fantastic. But most of this comes down to when, where, and how, and why. And if I can sort of impart some of the knowledge here, it's like, when do you go? Well, when you've got time. Carry a rod in the back of your car. I've always got a rod in the back of the car, and it's just as simple as having a rod, 2500 size reel, 3 pound braid, and this is what you've got to get your head around: 3 pound braid, and a bit of 10 pound leader, maybe a bit of 16 pound leader, and basically tie one of these on, and it's walking through the shallows. There are certainly times when it's more productive, particularly during storm times like this. I really like to fish at night time, and you'll be really surprised how many good bites come at night time. But when it comes down to it, basically, your life should really start at 7 for the flats, and that's the rod aspect side of things. I've got a personal preference for Shimano. I've also found that a lot of the rods, a lot of the stuff I wanted to do, I haven't been able to do because the rods haven't been on the market, and that's why we've sort of gone down the custom rod road, and the joys of social media and connecting with people. One particular rod builder, Scott O'James from Messiah Custom Fishing Rods in Lake Leak in Tasmania, Tassie Highlands, also has that same obsession. So some of the rods he's built me to be able to do this has profoundly changed my fishing. But that's all well and good. At the end of the day, you want to be able to walk into a tackle store. You want to be able to pick up a rod minimum 7'6". I do like the Shimano Raider range. They're not the best rods on the market, and they're far from being the worst. And value for money and bang for buck, they're probably one of the best. And it's one of those rods that you'll quite happily carry in the back of your car, and still be probably using in 10 years if you look after it. So a 7'6" Raider, or one of the other. I've actually got a few here behind me. One of the other Raiders I like. Let's see if we can get this one down here because it's quite long. It's actually, and show you on the You might be able to get that there. There it is. That's the Raider egg. All right. So the Eggie's 802, 8 foot. 3 to 6 3 to 6 kilo. It hasn't got much in the tip, but at the end of the day, it is such a versatile rod. It's probably one of the most versatile rods on the market in terms of if you want to wade the flats, and then you can take it squid fishing, then you can take it snapper fishing. But for the flats, you have a 2,500 size reel and 3 pound braid, and that is the key. 3 pound braid, even as opposed to 4, and I use 3 pound Power Pro. And we could break down each one of these segments into when, why, and how. But at the end of the day, there's so much good stuff on the market now, and all the new really fine, 8, 9, 10, 11 strand braids. They're all fantastic. But I just kept coming back to Power Pro because at the end of the day, braid at tops. And not everyone can tie an FG knot in the field in 20 seconds, standing up in water with a rod hanging onto you, with a net hanging onto you, and a whole lot of gear. Because with some of these fine diameter braids, you've got to have really good knots. And the FG is probably one of the best knots. And personally, I don't want to be tying an FG in the field. That's not my skill set. I can tie knots well, but basically, if you're new to this caper as well, you really want to start probably with a uni. Switch up to maybe a Slim Beauty, and then certainly aspire to an FG. But 3 pound Power Pro, if we're talking about flathead, then go to a 10 pound leader, and I'll tie the leader on so the knot is just above the spool of the rod, and then I've got about 1.5 meters at least off the end of the rod tip, and then after 10 pound we have a bite tippet, and that's the key. Bite tippet of around about 16 pound. And the finer braid, even 8 or 10 pound off your 3 pound braid, will actually go through the guides a lot better. But you got the bite tippet on the end of it. At the end of the day, you're fishing flats. A lot of the time, you haven't got a huge amount of structure potentially, unless you've got logs and stuff washed down after the floods. The key to it all is getting these lures as far away from the boat or as far away from yourself when you're walking as possible. Because the reality is, fish have a fight or flight reaction, and if that fish senses you in any way, shape, or form, they'll potentially go off the bite. Okay, so you want to be able to get this lure as far away as possible. Now, some of my custom rods, my flats rods now, start at 9'6" to 10'6", and if you've come through the school of fly, for southern anglers, if you come through the school of Ludwig, you'll understand that. Ability to shock absorption, particularly in the rod, in the whole system, the line, and the shock absorption that you get from a longer rod. So I can tell you now, I can throw one of these. Probably throw one of these. 50, 60 meters easily, and in some cases with the 195, you can throw that on the right rod over 60 meters away from you, which means you're getting to fish that don't even know you're there. And that is the key. Distance is everything. And then once you hook them on lighter line, if you've got a longer rod, the longer rod then comes into play because you've got shock absorption in the system. So you can fish lighter, you can cast further, you've got shock absorption in the system to angle bigger fish. And really at the end of the day, that's the sort of the key in terms of basic tackle. The when, where, and how, and I think that the key mistake I see most anglers making in the shallows is too much movement, and not being aware of where you're casting shadows, moving too quickly, because as you move through the water, you're putting out a bow wave, you're putting out vibration, the fish are going to tune into that. So I'll basically step into the water, and in some cases I'll put in casts 10 or 15 metres back from the bank when I first move up to a place, because you'll find big flathead in particularly in a foot of water right up close to the bank, and as soon as you move into the water, you'll actually scare those fish. So putting in 10 or 15 casts off one, fanning those casts out, moving 5 metres, maybe 10 metres really slowly, and then putting in another 10 or 15 casts, and really, really consciously working an area, looking for those furrows that are in the flats, and every flat will have at least one, but several major drains going off into the main channel, and they're generally the darker areas that you can see on the flat, and they're basically fish highways. So really working those areas, the darker areas that you can see, are really critical, and that's also critical as well in so many cases as to where the sun is, and the shadows that it casts. It could be casting shadows off the bank. It could be casting shadows off a weed edge. Flathead aren't as spooky as bream in terms of line shadow on the surface, but drains, small bits of structure, small patches of weed. Anywhere you've got any form of structure that's isolated, and particularly right near a drain, is always going to be just such a great place to start. And
really, I remember one of the things you mentioned when we did the podcast a while back on Jervis Bay or St George's Basin flathead was that quite often if you find a piece of structure or something that might be holding fish on the flats, you're better not to actually cast at that piece of structure, but to fan cast all around it, 20, 30 metres away, and that's where the bigger fish are going to be waiting. Would you like to elaborate on that a little bit?
Tend to find, like in terms of St George's Basin, but like a lot of areas, all these tiny little logs and tiny little bits of structure in the water hold a whole lot of small bait, and indeed small crustaceans and small prawns. And one thing I recommend you do if you get into your flats fishing, just go fishing one day and put on a mask and snorkel and go for a swim over the flat where you want to fish at first one day, and just have a look at how much each little bit of habitat just holds so much bait. And where you've got your bait, well, then obviously you've got your bigger fish, particularly bream. And one of the main food sources for big flatties, aside from mullet and aside from anything that swims past their gob, is also baby bream, or even bigger bream. We get flatties down here. I find a couple each year that are in the high 80s or 90s dead that have got 32 centimetre bream in their mouth, and they've choked on it. They just eyes bigger than their belly. So anywhere you've got an isolated area of structure, putting in casts all around that, because in some point, if you're either at a creek mouth or you've got a drain, which is a deeper cut in the flat, which is draining off into the main channel, there is pretty much always going to be a flathead around, and it's a matter of whether you can get the lure into that at the time that they're actually feeding, or manipulate the lure in such a way that you're going to instigate a reactionary bite. And in the case of the crossfire, to get them to come up and eat off the surface that's just next level fun altogether.
You mentioned the sun's important, and casting a shadow is a bit of a problem. So, quite often when you're fishing shallow water and you're fishing clear water, you want the sun behind you so that you can see the fish more easily. But the trade-off of that is you're throwing a shadow and scaring a fish.
Yeah, particularly when it comes down to bream.
Fish off, so the sun beat you back.
Yeah, just drop you there for a second, Greg. No, the sun at your back, just being aware of what angle that the sun is actually whether it is actually casting a shadow onto you. So if you're actually looking into the sun, well, obviously you reduce all that shadow area. Line shadow is a whole new issue again, but you wouldn't think a fish would be actually spooked by a bit of fishing line on the surface casting a shadow into the water. But when it comes down to bream, they absolutely are. And there's days where you've just got to drop down to 3 pound leader to minimise that shadow to actually get the bite.
Yep.
But I know we're jumping about here, but when it comes to whiting, I want the sun right overhead. Middle of the day is my preferred time to go whiting fishing, when the wind's howling and the sun's right overhead. And I think in that case there, the sun right overhead is also putting a glare on the water. Feel threatened by birds, sea eagles, because you'll see sea eagles come down and grab a whiting or grab a mullet, and perhaps in shallow water. I think that's part of it as well.
So, Reid, I've got a question here from Bruiser, and his question is, are you casting from the top of the flats into the deeper water, or are you wading in and then casting back towards the shore?
Both. All of it.
Okay.
And this is, I don't have an answer for that, because every location is just so different. I know the majority of my recent and my local fishing, I do very little fishing in current. So most of my local fishing is it's actually casting into the bank, and in some cases you're casting right up against the trees and then just moving that lure out. Or another one I prefer to do, areas I prefer to fish are creek mouths. And if that's not wading, some of those creek mouths we've got around here are so muddy that you actually have to go and fish in a kayak. But definitely casting up into the bank, the amount of big girls that will be lying in a foot of water, and the amount of flathead in general that just lie in a foot of water. And in winter, they all move up into the shallows because the shallow margins are the warmest, and they're getting that sun. They're up there sunning themselves. It might only be half a degree of temperature, but to a fish, that is a hell of a lot. And you pick up on these subtle cues as you're walking through the water. I'd always recommend wearing at least booties or some sort of shoes. But if you're walking around in boardies at this time of the year, you can really pick up on those subtle temperature changes, which to a fish means that they're either going to be there or they're not, and they're going to be feeding or they're not. So the answer to that, depending on Bruiser, depending on the area that you're in, there are definitely some areas where you want to be casting up against the bank and twitching it out, and then slowly working it back down into the deeper water. Particularly with stuff like this where you've got your bigger shads, your shad style lures. I'll get another one of these out here too. That's a 200 mil lure, and then I've got their little babies, their little brothers. So that's 200 mil. We'll talk about another rod to cast something like that in a minute. There's 130, and there's his little baby brother at. Get rid of that other hook off there. Little baby
brother. Rain coming down there now, mate.
Yeah, you can hear it coming down now. That's 105. So in the case of something like this, these are rigged on a. I don't know if you can see that there. There's a weedless worm hook in there, and basically that hook is just tied onto there, and then inserted into the split belly on this lure. And with something like that, you can actually cast it up into the bank and then just slow roll it and literally just turn the handle. It's that easy. Just turn the handle and that will just kick away. And because all the weight on this, the hooks on the bottom, the weedless, the shank of the hook's on the bottom too, it acts like a keel and you can actually fish that down a little drop off. So in that case, I'd probably choose a lure like that to start shallow and then work out into the deeper patches. And this is where...
Tell us what that lure is again, mate.
Okay, so this one is that one is a Pro Lure Fishtail. I'm going to give away some of these tonight.
Yeah, excellent.
So that is a Pro Lure Fishtail. So they come in 3 sizes. I only got 2 there tonight. That's one. That's 130 mil. It's 105 mil. And then you've got an 80 mil as well. And that's, for me, over the past season, that has certainly been my go-to. That white colour particularly. Yep. So with this lure here, it's got a little split belly on it. So they're really, we actually designed these very much in mind with the Barra guys and fishing for jacks as well up north. But in this case here, just slow rolled over a sandbar. It's pretty deadly on a whole lot of species as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, Reid, I'm going to risk jumping around a little bit here, and we've got a couple of questions that have come in, so I'll ask those on behalf of our listeners.
We could spend hours on flatties on the surface in shallows.
We might be here all night. Mate, you mentioned that the big girls often are around in that shallow water during the winter time, and that piqued my curiosity because I know I spoke to Starlow a little while back, and he was talking about flathead down at Duros Heads, which is a little bit south of you, but he was saying that over the winter time there, the flathead fishing pretty much shuts down. So can you give us any sort of indication of at what point, as we move further south, the flathead shut down for the winter? Certainly up on the southeast Queensland, that corner of Australia, they're right all year round. But when do they shut down? What point do they start to shut down for the winter as you're moving south?
The big girls pretty much shut down, depending on the year. Let's say end of May into June. And it's not that you won't catch them, but your catch rates noticeably drop off. And I actually, I actually just spent the last season too trying to prove that point wrong, and I failed because they I didn't catch I'm going to say a bigger one, like one over 70, even 70 centimetres. I don't think throughout May or June, July, and certainly into August in winter. Having said that, the shallows fire up for your pan-sized fish, and absolutely, it is the place to go in winter. Is shallow, in a foot of water.
Yep.
And
so
go on.
So I was going to say, if you finished on that question, because I've just got some other questions, and
I
didn't mean to interrupt you there, mate.
No. All good.
Okay.
All good. Happy to be.
Look, we've got Rob. Both Rob and Mario have asked questions about lure colour. So, Bruiser and Mario. So Bruiser's asked, are the colours that you use for softies the ones that you're showing us tonight? So the whites, is that a common colour that you use? And Mario's asked the question, do colours make a bigger difference in shallow water than in deep?
Yes, they do. Contrast is everything. And as you go through the water column, you start to lose different contrast as you get down through deeper water. So red, for example, basically at 10 metres is virtually grey. But Henry Ford said one thing. He said you can have any colour you want, and that's black. And that little thing there, you want to catch a flathead in the shallow. You want to catch a shadow. That is probably at the moment, I'd be comfortable in saying one of Australia's best-selling brim lures by tournament anglers in the brim fishing team, brim fishing scene. The thing is with these brim guys, they all complain about how many stinking flathead they catch in every brim comp. I caught 20 bloody flathead today. I caught 25 bloody flathead today. These stinking flathead were everywhere. And the reality is, if you want to feed, it is really simple. Contrast. I like a good contrasting thing, and I suppose in these southern estuaries too, that black lure also represents a bottle squid, and that's a favourite species, a favourite bit of tucker for pretty much everything that's in the estuary. But it's all about contrast, and obviously with black, that contrast, and you're only fishing in shallow water, you're not going to lose much of that contrast at all, as opposed to, say, if you were fishing anywhere from about sort of 4 metres down and beyond. Like at 10 metres, you pretty much lost. I think it'd be probably half the spectrum of colour. But that's your field of. You're going to be able to explain that a lot better than I am, Greg.
Yeah,
I get it. I understand the principle, but to actually get that bit out, Yeah.
Look, there's the other thing. I mean, the filters colour out, and that's absolutely right. The light filters out various different wavelengths, or the water filters out various different wavelengths of light at different rates. So red's the first colour to go. But the other thing to consider is if you just look at the anatomy of a fish's eye, take the retina of the fish's eye and put it under a microscope. There's two types of cells, and this is in any animal. It doesn't matter fish, birds, reptiles, doesn't matter mammals. They're all the same. There are two types of cells. One type detect colour, and the other type detect contrast. Now, in the human eye, the colour cells, the contrast cells, are about 1 to 20. In the fish's eye, they're anywhere from 1 to 40 to 1 to 200. So what that's telling us is that contrast is extremely important to fish, and colour is far less important. So, irrespective of what light's there and what colours are potentially visible, fish's eyes are not really well adapted, generally speaking, to seeing colour. But that's a conversation for another night.
Oh no, it's core and everything here, and in so many ways, I've thrown that out the window. I just use black all the time. It's as boring as it is.
Yeah.
Clear water, dirty water, all water. I've said to people, if I'm bored with using it, because I know it's going to catch fish, it just catches. I've done it hundreds of times with the black lure. Okay, I better lift my game here. I've got to catch a fish. Or I take my kids fishing. I put a black lure. I put a black lure on for them.
Yeah,
because they know they can walk up to a shallow sandbar and they might just catch a fish, a flathead. It doesn't have to be a trophy fish. But when it comes down to, if you want to feed, you don't have time to put the boat in the water, or you pull up somewhere for lunch, and you've got a rod in the back. You can rig a rod up, and you can go and have 10 casts, and 9 times out of 10 you whack a fish within the first 10 casts, and you're going to get that little bit of stoke for the day, and that's what keeps us going. But it's also a very, very efficient tool. So a couple of contrasts there. Obviously, the white's not going to lose much of that contrast in really shallow water. over a muddy bottom, over a brown or even black muddy bottom, particularly if you're fishing up the back of some of these systems. There's a good contrast as well. But yeah, white and black. I'm still working that one out, to be honest, because it's not about contrast in real shallow. It's not about losing the contrast, in that really shallow water. This, I think, is just a much bigger profile. So to a lizard, they're going to see that. And obviously a lure like this with a tail like that this is when vibration comes into it. And this is where we don't understand a lot of how fish are actually perceiving what is around them through the lateral line. Okay, and that lateral line stimulation to a fish, which is going to cause it to bite, is either going to be caused by you making too much noise in the water, or it's going to be caused by the lure going past their gob when they're not even aware of your presence.
Yeah,
and you will cause
just show us the big tail on that lure again. Yeah. Now, if you think about the lateral line, the lateral line picks up frequency of vibration from around about 200 kilohertz down, right? So a big, floppy, soft plastic tail like that is going to put out a nice and dense pulse that's going to be really easy for a fish to detect.
Yeah, and we've just had a good mate of mine. Some of you may follow him on Instagram and Facebook, Hugh Carney. You can pop in and see him at Complete Angler in Nowra. He's just caught a first metery on one of these. So that's the XL shad. That's a 200 mil lure. One pro tip with this, and then coming back to sound, I don't have any right here now, but if you want to increase the presence of that, glass beads. So you can buy glass beads, and they have little ball bearings. It's a little cylinder and it's a little tube, and you can actually just make a little indent up there in the I don't know if you can see that, but there's a split belly in the bottom there, and you just make a little indent in there with the end of your pliers or even a screwdriver, and you slide the glass bead up into there, and it's got little ball bearings, and then all of a sudden you get this as well as that tail. And
sound is incredibly important.
Yeah, it is, and it does. It brings. I've had flatties on the flats come in from like 10 meters either side of a lure to actually hone in on it and hammer that lure. Like when they're really fired up and they want to eat, they're very, very aggressive predators, particularly the big ones.
So mate, we've got a question from Rob. Rob, I don't want you to think we've forgotten the questions there, but I've had another one come in from Andrew first of all, and it's still along the same line, and then Rob's goes off on a different sort of a tangent, so we'll answer that one in a minute. But Andrew asked the question, how do black lures go at night? I'm going to let you answer that, Reid. I'll throw my two bobs with it.
Yeah, awesome. It's contrast. At night time as well, I prefer fishing on full moons. Okay. Reason being, you've got this big bright light in the sky, and you've got anything that's sort of going over the top of a flatfish's head lying on the bottom is just silhouetted up against this big bright torch, and you can see it really clearly. So the full moon nights are the best. And once again, a fish, how does a fish find anything in dirty water? It's not only its sight, its sound, and it's that lateral line perception that they're picking up throughout the whole length of their body as well. So they're not only looking for the lure, that in some cases, you correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, but it's almost like the colour side of things is almost going to be the last choice, because they've picked up the vibration first, and then potentially they've heard it, and then they've honed in on it, and then it's the contrast in the end, which is probably the last bit of the equation. I still don't want to discount colour, because in some ways and some days colour is definitely a major factor. But when it comes down to black, there's one reason why we've got black in pretty much the whole range, because black as a contrasting colour is just so underrated, and once you tune into the fact that black is very good, you won't go back.
I remember reading a story of
the big thunderstorm just cut you out there for a second. I'll just hang in there.
Because I need to know what everybody else is using. But the other thing this journalist noticed was that he had a lot of Rapalas in his tackle box that were black. And he said to Laurie, "Why have you got so many black lures?" Laurie said, "Because they are
one of them." Shad rat. That's awesome.
And then this journalist said, "Well, why can't I buy a black Rapala?" Laurie said, "Well, because no one will buy them, so we don't make them. But I have them made specially for me." So
Yeah.
that was a long time ago, and I think a few more
Yeah.
people have woken up to the power of black now. But certainly, I've caught a lot of fish, and I used to fish. I used to fish extensively for black brim,
Yeah.
using small black lures in the dead of night on the darkest of nights, and they had no problems whatsoever finding them. So
Yeah. Yeah.
they definitely find them. Mate, I'm going to move on now. We have got a question from Rob that I've been holding off on because it's going to kind of change the course of the conversation a little bit. But Rob's question, and it is about night fishing as well, is do flathead bites improve during night prawn runs?
Oh, it's next level. How many times have you gone out fishing during the day and you've just had a dud day, particularly on a full moon, whether it's been the full moon the night before? It's because the fish are feeding at night. They don't fish. They don't feed. Well, their feeding activity is not as intense during the day. And if you've got a fish that's been feeding all night and it's got a full belly, it's probably, and particularly a flatfish, and it's just lying there on the bottom engorged, it's not as likely to chase down a lure that's worked too fast past the fish during the day. I really, really enjoyed night fishing over the last 18 months and reconnecting back with that as well. It's as much as, and the reality is too, prawns also run on the full moon. It's not just about the dark. Obviously on the dark they're not as silhouetted, and it is well documented that a lot of crustaceans will all march, swim, like in terms of crays as well. They'll all walk across the bottom on the dark because they're not lit up. But the reality is prawns are out all the time, and the whole nighttime thing. If you can get a couple of factors right, in terms of, here's a good one, moonrise and sunset within about an hour of each other. And if you get a moonrise and a sunset a couple of hours before in this part of the world, an impending southerly front where the barometer's crashing, that is just, it can be just absolutely incredible fishing. And the surface bite at night time, on not only flathead, but we start to then get down here, we get big bycatch, big tailor, sort of 60 centimetre tailor. And the average tailor sort of 50 centimetres in this lake down here. That can be quite incredible as well. So they're not, in that case, I guess there's some sort of visual aspect into it, but you're also then manipulating that water lure on the surface of the water, and that can be quite productive. Now, one thing I do like at night, if possible, I'd do like a still night, because when you've got a slap on the surface of the water, there's obviously a whole lot of noise going on around. Whereas if you've got a calm, still night, and you've got a technique right that you can actually get that lure to be manipulated before it hits the surface of the water, so it doesn't just go plop and then sit there while you flip your bail arm over, and then a couple of seconds later it moves. With one of my casting techniques is when I cast, probably 10 metres before the water, I've already clicked the bail arm over and I've got the rod engaged and I'm already winding up the slack. So the second that lure hits the water, it's just off on the water and already fluttering around and just creating a whole lot of splash, and then a pause. And if you don't get hit straight after that, then you've got to, say, pause 10, 20 seconds maybe, and then move the lure again. So I like... I'm not overly fussed on. Look, prawn runs are great, but the reality is any calm night, and if I've got time, I'll go fishing. Because how hard is it in this day and age to lock down, the the absolute dark with the tide change, and then the weather's got to be right, and all these factors where it just does your head in after a while. It's just like at the end of the day, the fish has got to eat. You just go and throw a lure in the water, and you'll surprise yourself. You really surprise yourself when you think, oh, well, I wouldn't have thought they would have bit tonight, and they did. So,
Well, one of the traps I think is people get fixated on fish don't bite on a full moon, or fish only bite in the lead up to the new moon, or and it's just the fish are always biting. You just got to change your techniques and figure out how to fish differently to get them.
For example, St George's Basin, for local knowledge, and a lot of these southern estuaries down here, they can be really slow during the day, on the full moon or on the night of the full moon. For that very reason, I think that, well, I know that the fish are actually eating at night time. They're not eating during the day, and you can probably tempt fish with a burley trail if you're a bait fisher. And the bait fishers down here, I've got a few bait fishers I talk to where we quite often compare notes on a day where the lure fishing will be tough and the bait fishers will be catching fish, and other days they won't. They'll have a tough day and the lure fishers will catch fish as well. But 9 times out of 10, the bait fishers will do better on the full moon with bait, because a fish is coming up into a burley trail and all that sort of stuff. But they feed at night time, and they feed aggressively, and it's damn good fun. Just make sure that if you're out at night, you've obviously got to have a good head torch. Wear shoes, wear footwear, whatever you do, wear footwear down here at night. There's so many stingrays in the shallows, or stingeries, and
well, and just oysters and other sharp objects as well.
Yeah, all sorts of other stuff. And
speaking of night fishing, mate. Sorry, mate. Speaking of night fishing, Mario's asked the question: does the flash of a head torch at night spook fish?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, but what do you do? You got to use it. So I'll turn around and I'll face the opposite direction that I'm going to cast to, and try and minimise that.
Do you use red lights?
No, I haven't recently. No, but no, I haven't. No, I've just use a standard torch. But that's coming from a nautical and a marine background. I understand the value of like a dimly lit bridge with a red light. It's good. That's actually. See, we all get something out of this, Greg. Thanks for jogging my memory. That's awesome. Yeah, got to find another head torch.
Mate, we're
all learning all the time. Yeah, it's great.
We're going to continue on the moment. I'm keen. We've kind of steered a little bit towards flathead, which is fine because the majority of our respondents to the surveys, indicated that flathead were one of their key species. So that's good. But let's go and have a talk about some of these other species in just a moment. But before we do that, mate, you've got a couple of giveaways. So this is kind of unprompted and unannounced. Do you want to talk us through? There's only 17 people on this workshop at the moment, so the odds are pretty good. Tell us what you've got and how people can go about winning something.
I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I just got some gear I'm going to give away, mate. How do we do it? No, I've got a little lure pack here. So there's a pink, the S36, which is 36 millimeters. So that's one of our best-selling little crankbaits, and it's not just a brim lure, it's not just a bass lure, it's not just an EP lure or a whiting lure or anything lure. It's a pretty good floody lure. So that's a new pink Candy Crush. There's a black one there as well. So this is an interesting thing. You wouldn't think about 160 mil prey minnow, which is one of those, as an estuary lure. It's a minnow, but basically I get those and end up turning them into those. And I don't know if you can see that at all, but there's a
really
bit of contrast on there, and on there there's a couple of a bit of orange braid there to make it look like a prawn, and that in that colour there, which is ghost, and the white colour, it's pretty good. So 130 mil fish tails. They come in 3 sizes, and the XF shell. We just got to work out how we're going to give it away because I wouldn't have a clue, mate. I'd like to give
I'll tell you what, mate. We might go through. Well, we've got a couple of options, mate. We can either do a random draw, or we can go through the questions and pick your favourite question.
Random's good.
Random draw. All right. We'll do that towards the end. So what I'll do is I'll number everybody off, and I'll randomly generate a number on the computer, and we'll give it away.
Yeah, just after this, you can just direct message me if you like.
Yeah, no worries at all. So I've got a question just come through from the piscatorial philosopher. So how about using a low intensity red LED?
Philosopher. We should have a beer. Beer sometime.
Yeah. So how about using a low intensity red light? He says, if nothing else, it keeps your night vision and also helps to sharpen the fish's eyes. So monochromatic red light also works as a treat when prawning. So.
Yeah, we could all take something away from this session tonight. That's definitely on the hit list.
Yep. So, mate, let's go. I'm going to jump back to our PowerPoint presentation here, and we'll work our way through that a little bit more. So just bear with me as I bring that up. There we go. So we've got a whole bunch of species here, and we've really focused a bit on flathead. We've mentioned brim. Now dewies, they're not going to be found on the flats so much. Well, they can be at night, but Are they a common target for you in the shallow water?
Maybe in northern Australia, but there's too many snappy handbags up there.
Yeah, there's certainly a few of those.
Yeah. You'd have to speak
perch, mate. Talk us through.
You'd have to speak to Cleaver about dewies on the flats.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to do that, but I find it harder to find than a dewfish most of the time. So if you can get into the microphone, I'll be very happy to talk to him.
All right, okay.
Mate, so estuary perch are another species that turns up in those southern estuaries, and I guess anywhere from even around to South Australia, but all the way up past the Hawkesbury system. Estuary perch are in those systems. Give us a couple of tips for targeting estuary perch if that's on the agenda.
A 1/8 jig head and a motor oil grub, and pretty much most people would know what a motor oil grub is. It's just it's probably one of the most common colours with little grub tail lures. And then for surface, sort of something like a prawn imitation. Where I can't taking that screen away there. That's a.
Let me change the screens back, mate. So you.
Yeah, no, because I've got a little screen here. It's about half the size of my thumbnail that I'm looking at. Which is going all right. So that there is called an S. That is in the Pro Lure range. That is the SF62. So that's a 62 mil surface lure. And it's got a little rattle in there. Round bridges. Bridges are a good place to land base for EPs at night time, particularly if you've got bridge lights and on surface. I know here on the south coast, if you're boat based as well, you can fish pretty shallow water by simply just using your electric motor to just get upstream of the bridge and cast back into the bridge. And at night time, the surface feeding is quite amazing. But most bridges right up and down the coast here will have some population of EPs. Which are easy targets. They'll probably hang down a bit deeper during the day, and really close to structure. Weedless is not out of the question a lot of the time. Little motor oil grub can be good, and little prawn impersonations. Whole range of different little surface lures. Same again. I'll still use only 3 pound. I might up the leader a little bit sometimes if I'm fishing in really tight structure, but most of the time, still only fishing 4, even 5 pound leader. You can, and that also comes with the advantages of the longer rods as well, because you can actually put the brakes on some bigger fish. But if it's really tight country where they're bycatch to bass, well, sometimes you've got to up your leader a little bit and up the main line. But good fun. They're the little southern barramundi. They're like
they pull really hard.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things I've found through the podcast, I haven't fished for EPs for many years, but I did a lot in Western Victoria, and our fishing down there for EPs was always in shallow water, always around weed beds, quite often on the surface. Quite often at night they were taking surface lures. And then you head round to the sort of east coast and you get up to the Sydney and Hawkesbury sort of systems up there, and the EPs are a fish that you target on blades down in 6 or 7 metres of water or more, and
a lot of
completely different structure. Yeah. So in your part of the world, bridges and shallow water?
In terms of a lot of the bridges up here, like say for example Narrow Bridge at the Shoalhaven, but all of the bridges right up and down the coast are pretty much, they've got a population of EPs on them. A lot of those will be in shallow water, but once you're getting into bridge structure, you tend to find your banks there tend to be steep, but you can do it land based quite easily. But you're absolutely right, particularly as in winter time when they're schooled up. If they're not actually on structure and in snags, they can be actually schooled up adjacent to rock walls in really tightly dense schools. And a blade is also a very effective weapon as well.
Now, mate, Scott's mentioned that we haven't really touched on whiting yet. And do we use the same techniques and tactics for whiting fishing on the flats as the flathead? So Give us a bit of a rundown on the whiting, mate.
No wobble, no gobble.
I was waiting for you to say that.
I've taught hundreds of people how to fish for whiting, and that's what it is. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So, preferred lures for whiting?
Start off slow, and that finger there, babe. That one again. That is 100%.
Yeah,
That, or I do have another one which we don't have here. It's called the from that's SF62, but the other one, Kazami 60, and the Kazami 60 is actually just a little bit heavier than this, probably a thicker profile. Some days.
Just show us the tail of that lure, mate.
Ooh.
Oh, it's still got trebles on. I was going to ask you whether you switch them out. I know a lot of guys switch out that treble for a single.
Yeah, look, people do, and they get good results with it. But I tend to just run 14s, little 14 decoy 14s, and they tend to gobble those right down. A lot of in my experience, the stinger hooks get caught on the outside, and that's not a bad thing too, because it's a good way to pin them, but they can actually shake them free. But if I could, I've got one rod here, which like the end of the rod, it's basically your finger up on the, and you just point. Start by pointing, and that's all you're doing. Your fingers up on the rod, and you shake the rod tip. And all you're doing is actually, when you practice with it initially, all you're doing is shaking the tip of the rod. So the tip of the rod is just flapping around. And then you wind the handle. That's all you do. It's that easy. I've got a 7-year-old kid that loves going whiting fishing because he can cast. And whiting fishing, I really love whiting fishing. I'm one of these probably, fortunate people when over summer, if we're not burning with bush fires or flooding out, you can walk down the end of the road in the middle of the day, and you can have tourists everywhere. You can have people all over the place. So long as that sun is high in the sky, usually around from midday to about sort of 3 o'clock, and so long as you've got at least some sort of wind, but 20 knots of breeze, man. In summer where those classic summer afternoon sea breezes where it's howling, that is the best time to go whiting fishing. And wind at your back, and you will cast a lure. I can probably cast this little thing here. He's only 4.2 grams. You probably only cast that maybe 50 metres with 20 knots of breeze. But if you get a bit of 3 pound and get one of those Kazamis on that are 5.5 grams, you'll chuck one of those things like nearly 70 metres. If you've got the right gear. Start with a 7'6" long rod. Like I appreciate it's hard for people to get their head around the fact he isn't 10'6". Like, is he special? Or 9'6", but like if you can start at 7'6", that's a good introduction to getting away from even the 7-foot rods. From just a personal, we've all got opinions, we've all got personal perspectives, but a 7-foot rod to me now just feels so gutless and so ineffective. I can't get the distance I can off a longer rod. And on the flats, wind at your back, put the caster up into the wind. I click the bail arm over before the lure hits the water, and basically you just no wobble, no gobble, and you just shaking. Put your finger on the rod tip there, on the foregrip, and shake the rod tip. And as the fish gets closer to you, you start actually with the rod out in front of you, and as the fish gets closer to you, you're actually showing the fish the back of your hand. So you drop the rod down at 90 degrees to the lure as it gets a bit closer and near the water, and then you're able to part on the lure as it gets closer to you. But 9 times the lure gets hit within about the first sort of 5-10 metres. But the big brute white, like the big whiting, will come in at 90 degrees to a lure and outmuscle everything and hit it when you least expect it. It's really, really such good fun, and it's just such. For life, you can't understand why people pump nippers still, Greg. It's such an easy. In winter, actually, I should say in winter, but I've got a yabby lure for that. But in winter, look, obviously bait has its place there, but like in summertime, I back myself every day of the week to catch more whiting on top. So,
a couple more questions on the whiting. Bruiser's asked the question: do you prefer a softer tip rod, or do you like a faster taper one for working those little sticks? What's your preference
softer.
There?
Medium, fast. I think the Raiders from a production rod have got it. Like, they're Miller rods basically. Miller designed them. They're good. Yeah, definitely a softer tip because you can pull hooks with a really fast taper. Yeah.
And Glenn's asked the question about targeting whiting at night, and when's the best time of month, and what type of lure, hard or soft. We've kind of gone through the lures a little bit, I guess, but thing? Can you catch them at night on the lure? What's the deal there?
Yeah, absolutely, and they're a sucker for a prawn lure. Absolute sucker for a prawn lure, or a little a clear. Whiting tend to like clearer lures. Not so much.
Subtle colours, yep.
Yeah, it's not to say I haven't caught them on black before, but on crankbaits, they tend to prefer a clear sort of prawn style. They're very voracious feeders on prawns. Absolutely hunt prawns down. I guess it's in summertime that when the prawns are run and they're up on the surface, that the fish then are tuned into looking up, because that's the prawns are actually running. Whereas in wintertime, the majority of their food source is obviously down in the mud and may be dormant for months on end, and so they have to change their diet to potentially squirt worms. So there's times where like a grub tail as well, just grubbed along the bottom, as well as the yabby profile will be better than a prawn, particularly for winter. I find for winter time, I don't have a yabby with me here, but with Pro Lure we've got a yabby, and basically you fish it like bait. You just throw it out on a 1/8. You can even throw it out on a 5-gram jig head and load it up with scent. Load the thing up with scent. Any scent really. Your S Factor or your Pro Cures or a whole range of different scents on the market. Load it up with scent and literally chuck it out and give it a little twitch along the bottom and let it sit there for a couple of minutes. And you bait fish them. You basically got those worms. Like the old. Still, at the end of the day, the turtleback worm is just from Gulf. Yeah, from Gulf.
Yep.
It's slays
Catch
fish.
anything.
They do, mate. They do. They work really well.
Yep.
You cut those down,
Yep.
or put big long stingers on them. But winter whiting particularly, you just got to fish really, really slow, like horribly slow.
Yep.
Like pretend you're bait fishing.
So what point of the year, and I know this is kind of how long is a piece of string because it really depends on the prawn runs, but when would you typically switch from being able to fish for whiting on the surface to then going to the subsurface, yabbies and that sort of thing?
24 degrees. 22 to 24 degrees.
Yeah, not to put too fine a point on it.
Yeah, but that's when they tend to be up on top. Yeah, surfaces for me that's you need that warmth, and throughout summer if it's really warm they're going to be really fired up. And there's another thing too, like walking the flats and then casting back in towards the bank as well. Or if you're fishing in a situation with current, see once again our experience in the basin there's virtually no current, but in current I'll always try and fish. It's good to have the wind at your back, but try and fish across the current as well, because the fish are facing into the current, and anything that sort of swims right past them, they're going to come out and ambush them.
Yeah, great stuff. Now, mate, we've been yakking for about an hour, and I could yak for the rest of the night to you. But
is that all?
In fairness to you, look, we've kind of gone through pretty much what we said we were going to go through. But what I'd like to do before we announce the winner of the Pro Lure Lure Pack is just invite our listeners, if they have any other questions they'd like to put up there, that they'd like us to go through, to please do so, and we'll start to wrap things up a little bit. But, mate, I've got a question, and this is going back to the whiting. Is I know a lot of guys like a little popper rather than a stick bait for whiting. They like something that's going to spit a bit of water in front. Do you fish poppers much, or do you tend to go with the stick bait all the time?
To be honest, I don't think and my favourite popper is a little Strike Pro popper. It's a clear one. I really can't say I've fished a popper for 10 years. Yeah, right. At least. And it's not to say they don't work, because they do. They work really well. And that's obviously what all kicked it off with Kev Gleed, on the far south coast. Captain Kev guiding down south, and he and probably really bushy kicked off that whole whiting on popper thing, and that's where it started. And they are still an effective lure. And you know what? It's probably time that maybe the popper came back into the mix, because every whiting known to man has seen a little stick bait just going across the surface of the water. It's pretty hard to beat, though. It's something that just goes like this and wobbles from side to side. And visually, I think historically, in terms of having fished them side by side for a fair amount of time, and it has been some time now, but over a fair amount of time, that's where I came to that preference to use a stick bait as opposed to a popper, because it achieves
Yep.
so much better result.
Yep. Now Mario's asked the question on the whiting is, how big is too big a lure for a whiting?
90 mil. There's, I've got a box here, but I don't know whether I've got one in it. 90 mil probably. There's the Lucky Craft Gunfish. It's probably one of my other favourites as well. And a 90 mil gunfish. Over 90 mil, yeah, you're starting to get flooded. Terrible problem to have.
And I know a lot of guys, and Scott Eamon's one of them. He likes the 90 mil lures on the whiting as well. Fish on those.
Yeah. Sugar pens, obviously, they're obviously another very good lure. Just something, and that's a personal preference.
It seems to be the personal preference of a lot of whiting fishers, though.
Yes, that translucent prawn replica, yeah.
Mate, Bruiser's going to give you bragging rights here. He's asking you to tell us what your PB flathead is.
93. 93 is the PB. But for the life of me, I can't go past 92. It's just like, I'm cursed. I've cursed. There's like dozens and dozens of them at 92. And in this system down here in the basin, particularly, 92 just seems to be, I don't know what happens to them after that. And I've only seen a handful over that at 93 and 96. But the basin has just got this size. I don't know. Maybe they slow right down at about that early 90s, and then it just exponentially takes so much longer to get to that holy grail. But yeah, I think
that could be the case. Yeah.
But
now, mate,
there was one. Oh, sorry, mate. Yeah, go on.
You go. It's all right.
Oh, there was one image that was up there earlier on of a flathead which I had just on dark, and that that fish there came last spring, and that was in knee-deep water. And she followed. I got a bit of weed on one of these, and actually she followed that lure right to the tip of the rod, virtually to the tip of the rod, and just saw me and looked up and just went and took off. And I spent another 20 minutes. Throwing one of these at it, and she wouldn't eat it for the love of money. So I put a hard body on and caught a second cast. So I knew she was in the area.
I think that may have been
as
well on the podcast.
And when you're hooking something like that, and it's to see a 90 centimetre flathead just boring across the flats with a bow wave coming off it in knee deep water or less, it's pretty spectacular fishing. And the feel of that, I really like the feel of the long rods too. Like, and particularly, when you get into that. One of my favourites is 9'6" and 10'6". It's just a really nice way to fish too. It just feels good, particularly if you've done a bit of fly fishing, you'll get it.
Yep. Now Bruiser's saying ironically his PB flathead is also 92 centimetres, so perhaps you're fishing the same spots, mate. I've got another question here from Andrew Petty saying that summertime in the basin or in the inlet, targeting a feed, morning session, boat full of kids, where would you go, Reedy? What's your tip?
Boat full of kids. If you're going to lure fish with kids, troll.
Boat full of kids, summertime, morning session.
Yep. 4 metres of water. So you've got to have a sounder. And basically right around the whole rim of the basin, the weed stops at about 4 metres. And so if you can get a lure, and that's where one of those, that's an old Rapala shad wrap. It's a very old, this particular lure's just caught, God, I'd hate to think how many fish. You need a lure that, see the bib on that? Really big bib. You need something that dives down comfortably to about 4 to 6 metres. And I tend to use maybe even 4, even 6 pound braid for trolling. You can up the leader size a little bit because you've got to constantly give it that barra twitch to get the weed off. And the kids don't mind that. They just sit there going,
keep them from getting bored.
Keeps them getting bored. Trolling around the shallows, trolling around the shallows for flathead is rated. It's such an technique in New South Wales anyway. They just absolutely flog us when it comes to flatty. It's very much ingrained up there, and some of the techniques they use, in terms of just driving around in circles with incoming tides on the flats, is you got to see it to believe it. But kids, trolling's a good place to start. For the base, have at least one rod on the boat. With a stick bait or a sinking metal on it, because you will have a tailor bust up and it'll smash something off the surface, and you'll only get one shot, and you've got to get that lure into that space within about 5 seconds. Unless we don't have tailor anymore, that 2010 for some reason. The other thing is, mate, bait. Kids love bait, and if you can get them wanting to go fishing, then once they learn how to cast and they develop that ability to cast. I mean, I've got a 7-year-old whose PB his flatty for the summer was 74, and that was sight cast. And it was in a foot of water. Oh, such a proud dad moment. It was in it would have been a foot and a half of water, and he's hooked this thing, and it's gone, and then the hooks popped out of the top. He didn't say anything. He just stood up. He's opened up the bail arm. He's just done this underarm lob, and he's got one of the big. He's done his underarm lob, and he's twitched the thing. And this fish has come back 3 times before it's actually eaten it and off the surface of the water. And he hooked this thing, and it's just taken off across the flats again. And that's at well, he's 8 now, so he was 7 at the time. So long as a kid can cast, and with a bigger lure. Right, that's actually the thing. Right, that lure, if you want to have a look at that rod too, that is an oldie but a goodie. If you can even find one of those.
Just hang on a second.
G Loomis
Force over to the bigger screen, eh?
That's a G Loomis Force Light. It's actually one of the original American ones before they went to Malaysia. 12 to 25 pound. It's got a light. You can see how thick that is in the butt, but that will comfortably throw one of those, and that's probably one of the smallest rods I'll be using at the moment. That's 7'3", but that's because these lures here I think currently they're 55 grams, and they're going to lower. Crossy was saying he's actually going to lower the weight on this down to about 45 grams, so that you can have basically the same sort of tackle and not have to have basically a swim bait rod to throw one of these things. But from a kid's perspective, they can throw a big lure like that, and you get right up in the shallows, and particularly in the basin, up the back end of all these bays, creek mouths, muddy waters, real shallow country, and so long as you're quiet, you'll get the results. That's where the kayak side of things and the wading, I know, and the wading side of things outweighs everything. Because kids and they'd go and just throw a burley trail and sometimes and catch 50 million bream. That works too, and that gets the kids wanting to go fishing. With kids it doesn't matter. You've just got to get them. You've got to have a bend in a rod, and basically that means that you've got to lay down a burley trail full of chook pellets and a bit of 4-pound mono straight through to a circle hook with a bit of slimy mackerel or a bit of pilchard on the end of it. If that's what you got to do, that's what you got to do, because they'll get the bug, they'll want to go fishing, and then they'll have those pivotal moments where they cast out and they see a fish eat a lure, and then it certainly it starts the whole passion. That's where it starts. Yeah. You can't force them to do it.
Mate, we've got 2 more questions, and then we're going to let you go. And these are questions that were submitted earlier on by people when they filled out the survey. So first one was somebody's asked, and I can't identify who the authors of these questions were for that, so apologies for that, guys. But first question was, what's a mistake that people make when they're trolling for flathead?
Too fast.
Right.
It's just boating gear. Structure scan. If you've got electronics and you've got structure scan, that is a big game changer, because you can actually see right where that weed edge is. And these fish are, in so many cases, they're within a metre of the weed edge. And that weed edge is variable too. It just meanders in and out on different areas as well. And it's not necessarily at the base of drop-offs either. Like the basin is a funny area for that. But basically, boat just in gear, I always troll a lure at least 40 to 50 metres behind the boat minimum. And so
you're trolling on the main motor, you're not trolling on the electric?
Yeah. Oh, no, you can troll on the electric if you like. Yep, troll on the electric, but with 4 strokes these days, you don't even know they're running. And some of them now you can sort of, at idle speed, you can run that into trolling speed as well. So it's just as effective as the electric without having to use all the battery power. But by all means, you can do that. So roughly about 4 metres, find out where the weed meets the sand. And you can also do that by trial and error. If you just keep picking up fresh weed all the time, you obviously know that you're too far up the bank. The main thing is the rods I like trolling with are just like are actually back to the Raider range, and this boats are just the snapper rods, or just a really sharp 6 foot sort of barrel rod, so you can just give it a good twitch, because as soon as that rod tip stops vibrating, you know that you've got weed on your lure, so you just drop it back, give it a good whack, and 9 times out of 10 the lure will free itself up of the weed, and then 9 times out of 10 it'll get eaten too, because it's just paused and then it's had a good twitch and the fish has just gone bang. It's very, very, very underrated technique. I think when we were actually guiding for the last 3 seasons, more than half of our flatties were actually caught on the troll.
Yep. And that's it. As you say, in Queensland, it's a tried and true method. In New South Wales,
and that's it. That's it. I think one season up there at the Gold Coast Flathead Classic, it was a real eye opener for that. It's they got some crazy techniques up there. That stuff that Greeny does, where they drive. They got the I'll make it quick, but basically you've got a low tide flat, and all of a sudden the tide's coming up and it's pushing a whole lot of weed and crap, and you're literally driving around in a 50-metre circle, starting from the outside and just making your way into the middle, and there's lures 5 metres out the back of the boat in the prop wash and all this weed, and if you don't hook a fish within 30 seconds, you've got to bring the lure in because it's filled up with weed, and the fish, they come up in that first wave, and they're mostly pan-sized fish, and they're up to get pole position on the flat to get ready for all the other fish and all the bait to come in behind it. It's funny business. But down here, very, very different.
Amazing stuff.
Yeah, just get a lure that dives to 4 to 6 metres, and you're in the game.
Yep. All right. Cool. Now, mate, one last question, and it's probably the hardest one for the night. I'm not sure the leader officer is going to have the answer, but we'll give it a stab, and then we'll get to giving away some lures, and then we're going to let you go off and have a beer. So, this question comes from our piscatorial philosopher friend, and
I love it. I love it. I like him already.
He's a regular listener of the podcast, and nice. I love the support that he provides, and he's constantly proofreading all my stuff and finding all the errors for me, which is fantastic. I really appreciate it. But look, the question is, no matter what your position on climate change, surely the question on everybody's lips who fishes at the eastern seaboard estuaries is, what impact do increasing extreme weather events have on the health and well-being of the estuarine ecosystems? And the question was posted also prior to this live session as a survey question, and it was mentioned also of the bushfires and the impact of bushfires. So we might touch on that as well. And the question is, well, what changes are we seeing this summer, pre and post fires? So, mate, you spent some time. I'm up north. There's been no fires here. Our estuaries haven't been affected, but you have spent some time on the estuaries fires. What effects are you seeing?
It's one thing. It's fish are like the canary in the coal mine, and I think that's one thing I feel really blessed to have been able to sort of experience, is that life as a fishing guide, because you're actually out there and you're watching this stuff every day, and it's the subtle changes that occur in species, and the relationships between different species of fish and terrestrial stuff. Like there's really there's actual real corresponding relations, or I don't know whether there's symbiotic relationships between why different species of fish are there, depending on what plants are in bloom at the time as well. Like some of my Aboriginal friends first tune me into when the wattle first comes onto the trees. That's when the snapper come in close. We've got a couple of species of eucalypt. When they bloom up the back of the creeks, pretty much that's when the black bream are going to be up the back of the creeks. So I think there was real noticeable change, and this is probably because at the time I was spending more time on the water. I noticed around about 2009, 2010, all these techniques which had been that we were using and keeping diaries as well prior to that. I'm going to step back to 2002. That's when the basin, we got rid of the nets out of the basin, and 24 South Coast lakes were created as recreational fishing havens. So you notice this distinct pattern right up until about 2010, and that was the end of the last drought. And then after that, things change. Like the tailor, for example, they're no longer, well, I say they're no longer, but they, prior to that basin, 50, 60, 70 centimetre fish in schools, in some cases, like, a quarter of an acre thick and just busting up everywhere. And I thought, I can't become a bloody fishing guide. This is just too good. And they went from that to hunting as individual fish, like in the space of 2 seasons, and slurping off the surface like trout. So now, look, with fires, look, drought on land, drought in the ocean, and that relates to the amount of nutrient that has been put into the system that sustains prawns, because pretty much prawns, I think there's 17 different species of prawn in the basin alone. Prawns are just the baseline for everything to feed off in an estuary. And if you haven't got the nutrient, you haven't got the growth in the prawns, you've got more saline water as opposed to, that mixing. See changes, like, for example, this year, we just have not had the weed growth in around traditionally whole lots of areas that should be loaded with cockleweed. And that's basically because we haven't had the nutrient coming in to feed the grass. And you'll get out of the water, and I've had a couple of people comment to me on this recently, where they've stepped out of the water for the day and their legs were just covered in salt. Like literally covered in salt, because the water had just got that saline. In so many areas, from a personal perspective, that presented a whole lot more opportunities, because it opened up more ground to fish. And then the areas of weed that were left, in terms of like the zostera, as opposed to which is the skinny stuff, those patches held a lot more fish in areas that you wouldn't normally be fishing at certain times of the year. We've had multiple fish kills up and down the coast. And not just the closed eye coals. There's been a whole lot of stuff where, excuses have been used to open up lakes because, all the fish are dying. Well, basically after New Year's Eve, when we had that massive ash inundation, a lot of deoxygenated water in systems that were open to the ocean as well. And we did have die-offs of plenty of rays, plenty of floodies as well. So we've just been through a lot drier period. I'd like to think now, we had 432 meals at the back here last weekend, so the drought broke. In so many ways, we've had a really good flush. We're in a time of intense renewal at the moment. So many of these little lakes up and down the coast have busted open, and that in itself is going to set us up for some amazing autumn fishing if we don't have another flood. I'd be happy to have another flood in July now as a top up. That'd go all right, and that'd set us up for the next spring. So it's the subtle stuff, which probably doesn't register, but I acknowledge I'm not a climate change, far from being a climate change expert, but I know that 20,000 years ago in this part of the world, at the end of the last ice age, the shoreline was 10 miles further east of us now, where the continental shelf is, and over 12,500 year period, that sea level rose about 150 metres, and then it stabilised about 8,500 years ago, and that's what we're seeing now. So it was all doing a pretty good job before a lot of us came along and stuffed it up. In terms of
as a species, we do a pretty good job of messing things up.
Yeah, but look, in some cases we do. We do we're doing a lot of good stuff in this part of the world too. But in so many ways now, with the flush that we've just had, a huge amount of complete ash inundation, with floods. The fish are probably more tuned into this than we care, and a lot of the time they're primed up and they're ready to go. So I think we've come out of it. We've come out of the post-fire regime, and the floods are just really they're everything at the moment. So yeah, that'd be
so crystal ball gazing, mate. You reckon that heading forward, we're probably in for some pretty reasonable fishing. The fish stocks haven't been too badly affected by the fires. And what about, is it going to change your techniques? Our piscatorial philosopher friend he's right onto it, mate. Is all of this stuff, the climate change, the change in flow regime, the fires, all that kind of stuff, is that going to change how you fish, what lures you use, anything like that?
Look, it's certainly changed in species. Like, there are so many, and thankfully a lot of crew in this part of the world just stopped targeting bass, during the height of the drought, because a lot of the pools were dried out. The fish are really stressed, and in so many ways, rec anglers were doing a good job where they were either getting aerators into pools, and this is on the coast. And forget about the disaster that's the Murray-Darling Basin. They were relocating fish out of pools into more substantial pools, waiting for the rain to come. So the bass have been given a really good reprieve now. The amount of water coming down the Shoalhaven and the Clyde now is quite amazing. And I know from my own perspective, like for flatty surface lure fishing, as I just said, we've had so much areas where weed hasn't grown, and that's not a normal thing. But that is the result of drought. But in our case, from an opportunistic point of view, it opened up more opportunities, and we'll continue to do so now that we've got the floods on. Go and get yourself either a little black one or a little pink one with a deep diver, and throw that round at a creek mouth. And
yep, there you go.
Not bad. Yep. Yeah. Creek
All
mouth
right,
is
mate.
the same
Look,
principle down here
stuff.
up north. Run off time. We got run off times at the moment. Yep.
All right.
I know
We're gonna bring this to a close now. We've had a bit of
we're going to
a
midnight.
glitch there. Yeah. I'm going to blame your thunderstorm. Yeah. But mate, we are going to wrap this up now. So all set now to announce the winner of the lure prize. So drum roll here, Andrew Petty. So Andrew, if you want to get in touch with either myself or Reedy, and we'll organise for Reedy to send those out to you. And many thanks for putting that prize up, Reedy. It's
if you
wasn't expecting that. It's great to be able to
just shoot old mate email address. So if you want to direct message me, just you can either like the Bay and Basin Sport Fishing page, or that's probably the best way to get me. Yeah, or Greg at prolureaustralia.com.au. Yeah.
And folks, you should be following the Bay and Basin page anyway. If you've heard what Reedy's had to say here, if you want to pick up more great tips, you want to be watching his page for lots of information.
I am working on land-based tuition. I've just got a few things I need to like just get down pat with ProLure at the moment, but that is coming. But in the meantime, look, get in contact. I really value this whole fishing experience, and the fact is, I really like the fact I just get connected with a whole lot of people all around the country, all around the world. Experience, and we all learn from each other, so it's all good. So yeah, just shoot me a message. That's happy days.
Awesome. All right. All right, mate. Look,
you'll come back in just a second. I know you're talking. I just got you right now.
We're going to wrap it up, and look,
I got you back. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. So I was just saying, Reedy, once again, thanks for coming along and being the first guest on these.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Really stoked to be here.
So, folks, you'll get an email as well with a link to the replay. We'll put the replay up on the Fishing Q&A website, so you'll be able to go in there and watch that again as a video. And you hopefully, if I can get it all set up and working, you should be able to just click on some quick links as well to be able to jump to various parts of the presentation that you might want to listen to again, but without having to go through the whole thing. So once again, guys, thanks for coming along. Thank you, Reedy. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Gregory. Okay, good night. Thanks, guys, girls.